So thank you everybody for being here. Virtual career series for the comm department. I actually learned that this has been going on since 2020. That's at least as far back as I could see on the website. I'd imagine it had something to do with building community and staying somewhat connected through COVID. So Nikki, it's great that you're still volunteering to do this almost 4 years after that. So appreciate you a ton for being here. For those that haven't met me, I'm Jonathan. I was a 2017 grad. I'm one of the chair people on the UCSB Alumni Council that puts on a lot of these, bringing together the students currently with a lot of the alumni, just trying to get some general advice on what it means to become like a real adult as you're coming out of your time at UCSB. I've spoken at these events before. I think most of the alumni on here have. We have a lot of really exciting speakers coming up for the future. The goal here, especially when you're in school, is to get an idea of what some of the different career paths exist coming out with a communications major, right? Nikki's going to be going over marketing, communications, PR. I went down a sales and a finance career, and there's a ton of different things that you can do when you're an effective communicator. And UCSB has one of the top programs for communication in the whole country, and the soft skills that you learn just being a gaucho and living in IV, those two coming together make for a really hireable new adult. So thank you again all for being here. Nikki, I'm going to introduce you in a second after we go over some of the upcoming events. So David Bellinger was the previous president of the Alumni Council. He's going to be presenting next month in December. And we've got the next 4 speakers built out for the start of 2025. So really getting ahead of this. For those of you that are coming up on graduation, I would definitely bookmark these times to make sure you're going to be participating in them, especially if the topics themselves are of interest to you, or even if they're not. They're all going to be really good content. So I'm going to turn it over to Nikki. One thing I'll just add, I have this QR code at the end of the slides as well. So if you don't have a chance to scan it right now, you will towards the very end. Nikki, I will kick it over to you to give a quick introduction about yourself.
Cool. Hi, all. My name is Nikki Calderon. I graduated with a Comm and Poli-Sci degree from UC Santa Barbara, class of 2016. During my time at Santa Barbara, I was heavily involved with quite a few extracurriculars as well as balancing the 2 majors. That is not a flex. That was a death wish. I wish it on no one. So I'm adding that caveat at the top before I dive into what I did at campus, is especially if you're a transfer student or you're just nothing in the middle of this, pick some things or 1 or 2 things that you feel passionate about and run with it. Don't pick 10 things and run with it, because it's important you also enjoy yourself on campus. So with that, for me, I was heavily involved starting with ASUCSB, aka Student Gov. I was one of the first freshman senators there. And then following that, I did AS Senate again my sophomore year. And then from there, and simultaneously, I was actively involved in the Residence Hall Association because I lived on campus all 4 years. I never lived in IV. I just went to it a lot. And for me, that was where I got all of, like, I would say, my soft skills leadership training. Simultaneously, I knew I always want to pursue a career within entertainment. And so I always volunteered all 4 years at SBIF, the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, that brings in people from all over the world and across the industry into Santa Barbara. And it's some great exposure into the film festival entertainment world. And then my senior year, I got involved with Isla Vista Arts as assistant to the director, where IV Arts is the overarching organization for all the a cappella groups on campus. Think BFOM, forgetting the other ones, but the a cappella groups, IV Arts, like so Improbability, the stand-up comedy shows, all of the live arts that you would typically see going on in IV on campus that are extracurriculars, they're the main funding group for it. And they're the ones that would not only secure funding, but secure student awareness and help all those different student-run orgs out as like a larger governing body. So that is my time at UCSB in like the tiniest of tiny nutshells. In the summers in between my time in school, I was also interning at Warner Brothers Studios across a mix of different departments. My first internship there was at Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment and Publicity. Fun fact, I ended up there because I really impressed the recruiter, but I was not old enough to work in the legal department, which was my plan, to work in intellectual property and law. But they liked my personality, they liked that I could write, and I was knowledgeable about a lot of Warner Brothers properties. So they put me in an internship in publicity and video games. I lucked out, I'm a gamer. But from there, I fell in love with the career that is publicity. and all the communication skills that go into that job. So from there, I interned with the Warner Brothers Horizon production department, which meant I worked on Pretty Little Liars, the original series, not the reboot. I'm that old. And I was working in both the art department and the production department, meaning I was actually interfacing quite a bit with publicity when there were set visits, press tours, visiting fans, et cetera. And I learned a lot of soft skills in that role. From there, I hit my stride and was working at Warner Brothers television publicity department. And that was, I would say, in the peak of the CW era, if you guys remember Arrow, Flash, Supergirl, and all the superhero shows on the CW. And I had a great time there. I really found my niche working in Comic-Cons and fan interactions. And then from there, I met someone who worked at DC Comics. They really impressed with everything I'd worked on so far. And so my fourth and final internship before entering the workforce was at DC Comics, just across Wonder Woman at the time. It was their 75th anniversary. And I did the mother of all research projects for them in working on their press kit. And then from there, I kept in touch with all those different departments and people I'd interned with, and they let me know they were hiring, and I was kind of able to leverage an opening position into that, first as a freelancer at Comic-Con as a one-off, and then as a full-time assistant. And from there, I kind of just worked my way up the ladder from an apprentice to a junior publicist to what I currently am as a senior pub. And following my time at Warner Brothers, I'm now at Amazon Prime Video, also known as Amazon MGM Studios. Depending on the title I work on, I operate from the platform, which would be Amazon Prime Video, or from the studio perspective, which would be Amazon MGM Studios. My current scope of work includes everything international, meaning I identify and look for shows that were huge abroad and we bring into the US. For example, most recently, I worked on a show called Deadlock. I'm also across all of our K-dramas and animes. And so it's quite a bit of diversity, but that is sort of my career in the quickest nutshell I can give.
So Nikki, you've clearly done a lot. I was taking some notes as I was going through, and I still didn't even write a fraction about everything that you've done so far in your career. So, of course, very impressive. I had a question for you. What class, and maybe this is tough to remember, but what class would you say at UCSB taught you something that prepared you for the adult world after graduation?
Fun fact, I actually know it, and it was 3 separate classes. One was a writing minor course called Intro to Public Speaking. That was extremely helpful for what we do as publicity. I have to media train people. I have to speak myself. I have to give presentations. I have to create impactful PowerPoints. That was very helpful in terms of just hard skills and having a decent basis of creating meaningful presentations. The next one is Intro to Comm Theories. It is really helpful, but you're not realizing you're doing it until about halfway through your career. The reason I say that is when you're first starting out, particularly in entertainment publicity, you are an assistant, you're doing all the grunt work. That's like making badges, doing budgets, etc. As you rise higher, you have to do more and more strategy. And having a good grasp of those comm theories strengthens your strategy. But the second part to that, and I'm pretty sure the professor who teaches it still does this, is being able to teach those comm theories that you've learned to your fellow students. That skill is immensely valuable because it translates into teaching comm theories as an applied strategy to a show I'm working on to a group of people that have no idea what I'm talking about and don't necessarily see the world in the same way I do as a communicator. So being able to understand those theories and apply them to an audience that does not have that background is huge, and that was an immensely helpful course. The last one, oh gosh, I'm forgetting what it was called, but no, I'm not. It's the worst class. I say this with love because Metzger failed me twice. I was really struggling in it. So I'm putting this out there for all of the for all the people that are currently doing their pre-com classes. Take your stats course seriously, where you're able to read statistical data, where you're able to pull out trends. That is hugely important going into this new age of AI, database, data-led thinking, data-led strategy, but also balancing it with entertainment, which is much more of an artful type of craft. It's important that you can read the data, translate it to, say, people who are more artsy and creative minded. And on the flip side, take what the creative minded people are telling you and find and look at data in that way. Being able to speak to both of those is something that coming out of UCSB as a comm major will make you stand out. It's a brutal class. I failed it twice. I deeply appreciate Metzger and every single TA and every office hour I went to. It was really hard for me. But that stats class was huge, and I use that data to this day. And I embarrassingly go back to my college notes where I'm like, what did this percentage mean? So I can't recommend enough to take that class seriously, please.
All right, failed twice, got a lot of practice in it. I'd say those are kind of one and the same.
Yeah. Ugh.
Appreciate that, Nikki. Are you ready to go on to the next slide?
Yeah. Cool. So this is something I started talking about, I was chatting with Jonathan earlier. But what I noticed when I've worked with interns, or I'm speaking to college students or people that are interested in careers in entertainment publicity, a lot of what publicity is are actually soft skills versus hard skills. A lot of it is what are things you naturally bring to the table and what are things that you can be taught. And I found like when I'm working particularly with interns or recent grads, the ones that succeed and go far are the ones that have the soft skills at the bat. That's being able to read a room, being able to socialize, being able to ask questions in the right way, and just overall how they hold themselves in a working environment more than it was about getting the straight A's or completing extra courses. It was about people that could have a proof of concept and say, oh, I did these things. Look what I did here, because it meant that, oh, I can trust you to do this based on the stories you've told me. I just have to teach you these hard skills because it's not anything you've been taught, say, by your professors in terms of, say, maybe using some software or how to write a pitch necessarily. And so I kind of, going into the slide, broke up photos of what I did in college and how it's applying now to what I do in my real life as an entertainment publicist. So the first one up would be soft skills versus hard skills. The photo at the top is me at a convention. For those of you that are familiar with RHA, there was a larger national organization of like residence hall associations across the entire country, across different universities, both public and private. And they got together and they would speak at the convention. And it was a mix of leading workshops, leading a delegation to make sure they went to all of the correct places, and participating in a meaningful way and making connections. At that conference, like, oh, I met so-and-so from this school and this school, and then I saw them again next year, and now they're actually transferred over at this school and they're doing this. Those are like what I was talking about earlier at the top about having soft skills and just making that meaningful connections and networks that you can build on over and over again. That goes down into what I said at the bottom. This is me this past summer at San Diego Comic-Con, where I brought the Japanese created show Like a Dragon Yakuza based on a very popular Sega video game. What was unique about this is I think it was my 10th Comic-Con going, and it was the first time in my career where the majority of the people I were working with, I had to rely on a translator to speak to them because they were more comfortable and fluent in Japanese. I was bringing around a Japanese cast and creatives to an American press audience who speak English. And that was very interesting. And I had to rely on a lot of my soft skills and networking that I'd done for all of those past 10 years of Comic-Con to bring them around effectively. And it was everything from over the years, oh, hey, remember when we did it this way at your press suite? Relying on them, and like, hey, I'm bringing them around. This is what they'll do. This is what they won't do. And having the foresight and remembering the impacts and connections I had with people proved to be more important than, hi, I wrote talking points for you to say on camera, because those are things that don't translate, but the experience and the connections I made with people at those conventions were much more meaningful than simply following the directions I was given initially. Does that make sense? And did you guys have any questions about like a soft skill versus what a hard skill is? And any specifics on like what types of soft skills that are beneficial to publicity in particular?
Nikki, one thought for me is there anything that that the people on here could practice or really try to focus on that you think would have the most impact?
Yeah, I would think one of the things is practice being genuine. And what I mean by that is if you meet someone and they take the time to introduce themselves, give them that same respect back. And whether or not you have something in common with them, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a meaningful connection. You should be able to maintain a conversation with someone, even if you don't have a relevancy to that conversation. And you should be able to both gracefully exit and enter those types of conversations. Having that conversational skill is key as a publicist. For example, if I'm doing an interview, I need to cut that interview off because it's gone over on time. There's ways to do that where you can gracefully enter that conversation, end the interview, have them leave the room. And there are ways that you can just come in and say, all right, your time's done, please stop. And those little differences and those kind of like micro interactions will kind of color the coverage you get. So practice not only being nice, but genuine to people in your interactions. Because you can learn to time interview. You can learn to listen for key issues. But you want to network and make these connections in a meaningful way, even if it's not just to further your own professional goal. Publicity requires a lot of odd skills, and so it's good to just expand your network in a way that's interesting to you rather than a laser focus. These are the people I need to talk to, and if you're not on this list, you're not worth my time.
Yeah, and the best way that I've done that in the past, guys, is just asking questions about people. What are you interested in? What are you doing here? How do you know the people that are organizing this? Right? There's a phrase that I've heard. It's be interested, not interesting, if you don't feel like talking about yourself that much.
I agreed. I think that's a really good one. The other one I would say that I was given advice is a lot of relationships and connections are like plants. You have to water them and spend time and attention on them. And the best way to do that is to find a connection outside of your professional work life. For me, I think I bonded over one of my first mentors because we both liked cats. I'm not kidding. She is now hugely influential in my career. We're really close. She's someone I go to for a lot of advice. And I built that connection genuinely because we started with, oh my gosh, I think your cat's so cute. And that has turned into, oh my gosh, can you believe XYZ happened? What's your advice? Because again, the connection was genuine and we had something in common. For example, all of you here, we went to UCSB. I went to UCSB. Practice on me. Practice those soft skills on me. I'm all for it.
And like Ron mentioned in the chat, guys, Nikki is, of course, very well spoken, not a ton of filler words. That is something you can practice, right, Nikki?
It absolutely is. Set yourself up for success. Ask the questions in class. Ask for opportunities and find yourself opportunities where you can speak. It's terrifying. I still trip on my words quite a bit occasionally, but presenting in class is one of the best ways to practice a public speaking skill in a safe environment versus having to practice public speaking and doing a massive presentation in front of your boss in the workforce. Use those insulated environments in school to make mistakes. So that way, once you enter the workforce and you've lost that safety net, you're confident enough in yourself to be doing those things.
Big time. All right, I think we can go on to the second part of this.
Cool. Okay, authenticity versus interest. Something I mentioned in my earlier topic is not everything you do is going to make sense or be uniquely about publicity. For me, I did not have a lot of money in college, and so I worked on the side as a wedding planner's assistant. Basically, if she had a huge wedding, I'd come in and usually just a couple of my friends, I was one taking the photos, so I'm not in it, but it would be the three of us. We'd come in, we'd help strike a wedding, we'd be a runner for a bride, we'd throw on some black and be wine servers because it's staffed. That sounds like a small skill, but going into my career in publicity was huge because it gave me a great grasp of event planning. It gave me a great grasp of everything like knowing flowers, which ones are going to wilt in hot weather, which ones are not in season, etc. Those are the tiniest details that as publicists we do look at. I work with an events team at Prime Video and they're excellent. They put on the event you see below, which was all about, sorry, I'm just going through my head to make sure. Yeah, the show's out. It was all about a show and the characters were using the language of flowers to speak about certain topics and storylines within the show. And so this is the height of the strike. We had no talent with us. This is where like, I'm going back to wedding planner days. One of the things we did is we did a bouquet making class for all of the bridesmaids. And it was a nightmare to put on at age like I think 19 with that wedding planner. However, all of those skills I learned ended up going into a publicity event where we invited press to make bouquets and talk about the language of flowers, which is a thing. Google it. It's super cool. And that was why we got people talking about the show creatively in a way that didn't involve interviewing talent. That said, I have zero interest in flowers. I am extremely allergic to everything. but it was an authentic experience I could apply that I had had in college, and I could apply it to my work. So even if you don't have something you feel strongly about or you're really interested in, there are still these odd skills and experiences you're going to have in college, just being a college student and being aware that you can apply in indirect ways or direct ways to what you do when you enter the workforce. Another example of this for me personally is I had to pick up Photoshop because we didn't have a designer for something for one of the events I was throwing for RHA. That turned into, I'm not a huge design person, but I know how to do it and I'm competent enough into it that as an assistant, we had someone drop out who was not available to do something for us, but we needed this invite designed. I was able to just hop in and do it myself. Being to have those DIY skills, and I authentically learned it, not just, oh yeah, I know how to do this, I lied, and then I go and Google how to do it, like actually learning those skills, even if they're not the most interesting to you, really helps you stand out as you're entering the workforce because you can do something no one else can do because you took the time to authentically learn it instead of just Googling it when it was important. So again, just starting small, and just like getting yourself practice and exposure to it. On the flip side of that, interest is huge. You probably clocked it earlier in my career. I liked video games. I like comics and superheroes. The reality is massive superhero nerd. To the right is my big comic book collection you can't see. I was able to leverage that by being just genuinely excited and interested in the shows I worked on. And in return, a lot of the more senior people observed, not only was I passionate about it, I was also extremely knowledgeable. So at the time when I was working on a show called Supergirl, I was able to just hear a villain's name and go, oh, it's actually that person from this comic and he's never been on screen before. We should make a big deal out of press for it. That was a genuine interest I just had as a fan that I was then able to apply to my interest in, having a job. Because I was a helpful tool to my boss and the senior people around me because of my natural interest. So I've personally taken the approach of I'm never going to shy away. If I really like something, I'm going to be proud of it and own that fact and use my knowledge and my interest in that topic to apply to my job. Another example of this, I had a weird thing. I was really interested in different languages in college and non-written languages. And so that's where I knew about the language of flowers. And that's from there we drew the connection like, oh, that show isn't making it up just for that show. This is a legitimate thing. And we were able to turn that into a flower making event. So again, it's like balancing authentic learned skills with just what interests you and what do you find interesting. And even if it's not directly related to the career you want, there are little threads that you can pull into making a project your own. And that'll make it stand out.
Yeah, no, it's building a cultural experience, right? And I'm sure you probably didn't expect that a bouquet making event when you were 19 working for a wedding planner would have a big impact like it did in your career later on in life, but it did because you did it. That's really
exactly.
Cool.
And on that note, write down stuff. You guys are young now. I'm only 30 and I'm telling you, I forgot half the stuff I did in college. I saved everything for a reason for exactly things like this. I'd saved my photos. I saved documents, worksheets that I did. And looking back on that, it sparks ideas and memories because as college students, you're going to be the first ones at the line with the newest ideas. You haven't done it all yet. So you could have really cool ideas buried in there and experiences that the workforce you're joining may not realize is a thing. So make a point to save what you've done so you can look back at it and kind of strike for inspiration or learned lessons or to support your portfolio when you're doing work. And that kind of leads into the next thing, which would be ownership versus execution. For me at the top, I was heavily involved in Lobby Corps. And one of the main things we did was coordinating a panel of our local government representatives. It was just a classic town hall. We did it once a quarter. They'd come in, they'd talk to college students and vice versa. That was everything from, okay, how do I secure permits? How do I reach out to people I've never interacted with before to speak to a panel? How do I draw a crowd in? How do I design and invite in a way that will ensure we get RSVPs? How do I ensure that it's a dynamic panel by picking the topics, etc. That was like everything I had to do with a group that you see below. Again, I was the one that took all the photos. I was not usually in them. But using that group picture there, like we would put on these panels. So that was like a large part of it for me. I would always own the outreach to politicians and I'd reach out to their comms teams and ask them, hey, can you do this, this, and this because of this? And I'd have to position my ask in a way that was beneficial to them. Now, skipping ahead to what I do now as a publicist, it's very much the exact same thing, except with talent. The photo below was at the Aston Martin flagship store in New York City called, oh gosh, drawing a blank on what it's called, but it's really cool. You can Google it later. It's in the city. And it was partnered with 007 Road to a Million, which was the first ever foray for the James Bond IP into television, this time in the form of a semi-unscripted reality show where contestants had to reenact the challenges Bond did across the various movies and then answer trivia questions. Well, amongst many reasons, one, they're from all over the world and it was during a pandemic. So flying people in across country lines was challenging. Two, this was a show that was created for the UK, for a UK audience, but it's 007, it's James Bond. He clearly is a recognizable name within the US. And so for me, it was a large part of creating a strategic event that I was asking people to come out and speak to it. So it's the director there, Barbara Broccoli in the center, the stunts leader, department head for all the James Bond films, and creating a dynamic panel of them talking not only about what they did on the 007 franchises, but also making sure that topics connected to the show itself. And so a large part of that was, again, going back to what I did for Lobby Court. Okay, I have to reach out to these people. I have to position it in a way that makes sense to them, in a way that's positive to them. And I have to create an environment where they'll be willing to openly speak about it. Going back into what I did for Lobby Corps, finding an audience, how to find an audience for this. It was like pitching to motor trend aficionados. There's a James Bond official magazine, and going and diving deep into all of this research. And those were things I owned and did as a member of a team. And so a lot of the skills, even though they don't seem like one-to-one connections, I mean, politics, Lobby Corps, speaking to constituents is not the same as producers talking to press, but it's still those same skills required to execute it. And then going into last bit is just execution. I'm a big fan of this, especially when I come across people that are younger than me and are like rising up, and I still get this experience myself. It's really important that at the end of an event, you have something you can point to and said, I did that. I executed this portion of it. Because as you rise in your career, you need to be able to not only speak about the work you did, but speak about specifically what you owned and what you executed to show how you're an integral part of the team versus a replaceable aspect of one event. It helps you stand out. It creates a brand for yourself. And it also shows that you're someone who's reliable and you can execute something in a timely fashion. And as you're coming up, and especially when you're first starting, you can learn a lot. And so it's more about, do people trust me? And can I live up to their trust by owning what they've asked me to do and executing it in a way they want? So those are just, for me, I'm a tangible examples person, but any questions so far or just better clarity on things?
I think, Nikki, with the advice section on the next slide, I think that'll get a thought-provoking response.
For sure. Oh yeah, so this is all the advice I was given over the years, since I think I put it in order of relevance. The first one up is beware of your surroundings. That can mean a lot of things. In entertainment, you are in a variety of spaces. You don't know who's paying attention, who can hear you, who you're talking about, etc. So just always be aware of your surroundings, and not just what you're saying and what you're hearing, but also just how you look. I'm all for a self-roast. This was me covering talent who was doing a carpet interview, and I was not paying attention. I think I was talking to someone just out of frame about something that clearly annoyed me. And I ended up all over multiple press Instagrams and fan cams. It was awful. My boss lovingly was like, this is why you have to be aware of your surroundings, because you don't know who is paying attention to you, and you may not be paying attention, but someone always is. So just be aware of your surroundings and how you hold yourself. If you need to get upset about something, go drive like 20 miles out of town, seal your windows and rant in your car, leave it out there, and then come back. Just be aware of how you're perceived and who is perceiving you. The next thing is assume nothing and double check everything. I can't say this enough as someone who works across multiple international teams. Culturally, what might be standard for you as an American may not be standard for, say, someone in Canada, even if we're in the same continent. Never assume anything. And no one will ever be offended by you asking questions of like, hey, are you aware of this? Or I'm not sure about this. Just always ask the question and never assume that something's been done or it's implied. Just ask. And then folding into that on a slower scale is double check everything. I cannot tell you enough how much that has saved me, especially in my earlier assistant days, having to double check like time zones, things like that. Checking flight numbers, capitalization, smaller things. As a publicist, so much of our job is attention to detail while making it seem effortless. All those press releases, news articles you'll probably find at one point, those have been examined constantly down to like the shape of a period, but we have to do it very quickly and we have to do it correctly the first time. Things slip through, so just double check it. And this one was huge. So yeah, sorry, Jonathan.
That's okay. Sorry, Nikki. I'll add, guys, the easiest way to slightly upset somebody or maybe even lose out on a job opportunity is by spelling somebody's name incorrectly. I did it once in an email that had my boss on it a couple of years ago, and he set up a meeting with me to basically grill me for 20 minutes about how that or why that is so important, right? I know I have kind of a funky name spelling, Nikki. I'm sure you get some funky spellings with your name as well. And if you're really trying to get somebody to like you, that's the easiest way to make them not like you as much in a slight way. But
no, I 1000% what Jonathan said. If you're emailing press and you get their outlet or their name wrong, they're never responding to you and they'll remember that you screwed up. It's very personal. So that's great advice. And then I think following that tone, the creative director for The Liars told me this and it struck a chord to this day. It may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. That is huge. A lot of the times coming out of college and just kind of a younger mindset is, I didn't do it. It's not my fault. I don't have to deal with this. Like, it's not my problem. It's really hard to get over that. But unfortunately, there's going to be times in your career where not being the bigger person necessarily, but just recognizing I didn't screw this up, but I'm going to fix it is huge. And that makes you stand out because a lot of the times something has gone wrong. Trying to think, a great example for me was I was in charge of like 15 iPads that we used for checking into an event that had like 700 people. I had handed the box of iPads off to someone. I was like, here you go, I'm done. I did everything I was supposed to. And I got a panic call like an hour later being like, Nikki, where are the iPads? Like, what is going on, et cetera. And my first gut instinct wasn't to say, oh, I gave it to so-and-so, like it's their problem. My first instinct was, I gave it to so-and-so. Do you want me to go back and check it since I was the last one you were aware of seeing it? I did not take blame for losing it, but I did take responsibility to go and find those iPads. Lo and behold, that person had gotten into an accident. So the iPads never made it to the final destination, but because I went back and checked, I found the iPads, problem solved. It's these small things that make you stand out when you're first starting or when you're applying, where you can show not just ownership, but responsibility for something where you saw a problem, you came in and you fixed it, rather than just tossing the ball or tossing the blame to someone else. And there's ways to do that without taking responsibility for the fault, but just responsibility for solving the problem. Mm-hmm. The next one is, and this is particularly for publicity, especially, no is the beginning of negotiation, not the end. I cannot tell you the amount of times I've read into press and be like, hey, are you interested in covering this? Do you want to interview this person? And I'm like, no, I can't handle it. I'm super slammed. I'll write them back and I'll give them a couple days. I'll see what's going on in their lives. And I'll write them right back and be like, hey, I saw that this happened, a little bit different angle, but what about if you wrote about this? It's not what I talked about initially. It's a little different. What about this? And it's just that constant back and forth of yes, no, yes, no. But it works out in the end. I would say I got like a 40% success rate. But don't be perturbed by the word no. Another example of this is when I got my first job offer at Warner Brothers. They offered me a certain hourly rate. And I asked, like, I hear that, but we live in LA. Can I get this? They said no, but they did come back and said, but you still ask, so we can offer you this. It wasn't a big amount, but there was no harm in just asking the question. So again, it's just negotiation. And then going into the next thing, this is advice I got from multiple publicists over the course of my career. And it was that if you're pointing out a problem, be ready to discuss a solution. And what that means is publicity works extremely quickly. there are constantly problems we find. There are problems we can fix, problems we can't fix, and problems we just have to be aware of. In that, if you're going to be the person that's pointing out a problem, you should be pointing out the problem for a reason. You aren't just pointing out problems because, oh, that's bad. This is an issue. You should come in and be like, hey, I caught this as an issue. Here's what I think we should do to address it. It sets you up as kind of a leader within your department. It sets you up as someone who's reliable, and it helps with your perception. For me, being a woman of color, if I come in and I'm just like, hey, there's this, this, and this, these are all problems, you will just be perceived as a bit of a naysayer and someone who is complaining. Versus if you come and say, hey, I found XYZ problems, here's what I think to do about it. Even if the solutions you've presented aren't the correct solutions, it shows that you've come to the table with the mindset that you want to fix this issue, not that you're just there to call out other problems. And that has gotten me quite far, especially when I work with more senior level people, because time is quite precious and you don't get a lot of it in meetings, especially on higher up you go. Being able to quickly and concisely point out the problem and share your solution is key in getting that type of recognition and growth. And then the last one, this is something my dad said, but people care more about how you fix your mistakes than why they happen in the first place. There are countless examples as to why that's hugely important. I'll use the one on the bottom left. That was from this past summer at Batman Cape Crusader. I did not realize that our moderator was going to be late to our panel. And traditionally at Comic-Con, the moderator will come up, give the intro, you play the episode, the moderator comes back on to do the panel following the show. Well, our moderator was caught in a different panel. He was running over. He was not going to make it in time to do our intro. And it wasn't his fault. It was my fault. I didn't realize he had double booked a panel and I should have caught him. So about 45 minutes before the panel, there was this, hey, who's introing it? And then it was entirely my fault. So I was like, guys, I did not realize this overlap. I'm happy to just say the intro. And then I went up and did it. It was terrifying. It was like thousands of people in that room. But I went and read the moderator and I got off the stage and everybody was like, oh my God, that was so much fun. And now you have a great story. Nobody was mad at me for forgetting to get a moderator to intro the panel. That's like a more wholesome story. I can tell you more horror stories. Like I forgot to book my boss's flight home. I thought I was going to die. She was very nice about it. All things considered, she was able to get her flight home, problem fixed, and I apologize quite a bit. It's all about, did you fix the mistake? Did you catch it? And how is it not happening again? They don't want to hear excuses. They don't want to know why the mistake happened. They don't want to know whose fault it is. They want to, okay, this mistake happened. Has it been fixed? Yes. Okay, whose fault was it? It was this. Great. How are we making sure it never happens again? That's how you can acknowledge it, move on, and you learn quite a bit that way instead of constantly having to cover for yourself or making excuses. Just own up to the mistake, fix it, and ensure it won't happen again. And that's much more memorable in a positive light.
Yeah, exactly.
Nikki, you have to explain that last photo.
Oh, yes. So this is something, sorry, I forgot about it. Being aware of your surroundings. For me, one of the main things I do to kind of relax is I love to bake and I'll bake everything and anything. So I was constantly just bringing in cookies to the department. And this is one of those moments where I was not really thinking about the long-term implications of me just bringing baked goods to the department. I was friendly with everyone. Well, it came up to be very relevant when we were hosting the Friends' 25th anniversary party, and they needed an edible prop to create the trifle from Friends. And my department head went, oh, Nikki can just make that. She bakes everything. And I, again, was not aware of my surroundings. I went, what the fuck are you talking about? Quite loudly in like a large department meeting. I think it's probably my first or second year of being an assistant. Because again, I was just in shock. Anybody had paid attention to me bringing cookies in. And they went, yeah, no, she can bake. Okay, Nikki, can you make that trifle? And I was like, I think so. They're like, great, you're doing that. And I was like, I don't know what just happened here. They're like, too bad, you signed up for it, you're doing it. And I was like, what? And everybody else, I got mocked quite a bit, but it was great. The trifle was a hit. All of that is edible. It's all sweet. I did not put like the beef and nuts and anything. But again, this just goes back to being aware of your surroundings. People observe what you do, even if you're not necessarily paying attention to it. And so that is, again, be aware of how you present yourself because it can lead to some interesting things, like having to bake a trifle for the Friends' 25th party. that looks just like the one in the show, but could be edible without inducing vomiting?
Good question, Ron. All right, Nikki.
Cool.
So, thanks a ton, Nikki. Guys, I want to reiterate something that Nikki said towards the beginning. Use meetings like this, situations like this, to practice your public speaking a bit, right? Feel free to stay off video if you'd prefer, but use this as an opportunity to speak up and ask a question. So I have one that I'll kick it off with, and then it sounds like Ava, if that was you, yeah, Ava might have a question, and then anybody else, you can go next. So I'll kick it off with, what is one thing that these students on here can leave and go do to make them more hireable?
I would go and take a look at a job you want, even if it's not one you can apply to right away for reasons, and look at the descriptors of the tasks, so like the actual things you're supposed to be doing in that job, and then think about what you've been doing in college and say, oh, I can make the argument I was treasurer of my club and I oversaw an X amount of a budget is the same as overseas department budget needs. It's not that's a very clear one-to-one, but it shows what you've done in college can be an applied skill to the job you're applying to. Something more abstract could be responsible for a heavy calendar and phone call schedule if, say, you're a sustained executive when you're first starting out. That's the same, in my opinion, as being a student leader and you have to be across 4 or 5 different club meetings managing your academics. It's the same skill. It's managing a calendar, not in the way you necessarily read it in the job description, but it is what you do. So I would go home, find a job you want, and then come up with key examples for everything you can under that job that's maybe a little more abstract or a soft example of what they're asking for, especially if you don't have direct internship experience for that job, or if you don't have a direct connection to that job. Being able to draw those lines and practicing that now is great for when you go to write your cover letter, you go to do your interview, and when you go to answer interview, and when you go to submit your resume. It's not just having the keywords for the algorithm to find it when you submit the search. It's about being able to do that and also have coherent sentences that a recruiter or a future boss could comprehend into what the skill they're hiring for is.
Good feedback. Ava, looks like you have a question.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for all your advice, Nikki. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone else here does too. My question is just, do you have any advice on networking in general? I find it kind of hard to reach out to people on LinkedIn because they don't add me back. But I don't know, do you have any advice on that? I'm just looking to get into marketing, PR, communications, and I know it's easier to reach out than to apply online. So let me know.
Definitely reach out. I like to say this, voter registration was probably the best thing for my career because I got a lot of doors slammed in my face. I got a lot of no's. And it's honestly a numbers game. So people might reach out to, you might reach out to 10 people on LinkedIn and only 1 will respond. Make sure to respond to that one. And then from there, go to events, volunteer. The generation, I would say, I'm like a millennial. Millennials and up actually do appreciate conversations. I learned a lot and I made a lot of connections being a volunteer at SPIF by literally, I was the line volunteer and I just handed out the surveys afterwards and I would make small talk. I'm not kidding. I met executive producers for Assassin's Creed. I met the writers for Frozen that way. And it was just a genuine, oh, hey, how do you find yourself here? Oh, that's interesting. And sounding genuine and being interested in what they're telling you. Those opportunities where I placed myself in in-person interactions led to more meaningful ways, meaningful connections than just an outreach on LinkedIn. Because LinkedIn's a little awkward, but online dating, you're like, I've messaged you, please message me back. And then you have to find the right schedule and the time. So put yourself in situations where you're interacting with people in person and actually talking to them. And then a smaller thing that, at least for me, if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'm really bad at it. I check my LinkedIn once a month and I just go through whatever messages and I respond right away. And the ones I end up connecting with are the people that read my response and say, I'd love to connect with you. And they make it easy for me. They say, these are my availabilities. If these dates don't work for me, let me know and I'll give you new ones. Versus, oh yeah, I'd love to meet. And then they just don't respond beyond that. make it as easy as possible for the people that do respond to you to schedule time with you. A lot of them are really busy working professionals. So the easier it is for them to find time, the more likely it is they'll connect with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Zach.
Yo, what's up? Oh,
Hey.
hey, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to share with everyone. Everyone is, it's great to share. But my question was, coming from a school like Santa Barbara, I just want to ask, like, with the school's emphasis on research, how has like just practicing research and all that together helped you with your career? And like, is there any like big takeaways you've taken from learning how to do research from the school?
Definitely. I think research is really important. My favorite thing I got to do as an intern is I worked on the press kit for Wonder Woman's 75th anniversary of the character. I used a lot of my research skills there of just, okay, how do I verify sources? How do I find proof? Like secondary, primary sources, very basic things. That was really helpful when I was doing a lot of research and deep diving into shows. So just citing sources. I cannot stress that enough, especially in today's age, being able to cite your source. And if you're going to someone with information to get their attention, you better be able to back it up with facts, not just a gut feeling. So that's one. The second part for research that is pretty helpful is you guys are focused on academic research right now, and I think that's super important, especially for your academic careers. However, there's a second side to it. Being able to research something quickly is very helpful. For example, the show I'm working on right now, The Sticky, which is launching at the top of December, was inspired by a true crime story out of Canada where millions of dollars worth of maple syrup was stolen. It was a really fun show. The trailer, highly recommend it. Jamie Lee Curtis, it's by Blumhouse, etc. But a large part of this, I just had to quickly research, like it's like, hey, Nikki, are you interested in working on this show? And I had maybe 10 minutes to look up, okay, what's the show based on? Who's it by? Where is it from? So having the media literacy, the skills that you learn as you're doing research projects is very helpful to determine, okay, this is real, this is fake. This is interesting. Don't know yet. Let's look into it. And being able to quickly decipher that information is helpful. The third one, and the one I find the most helpful in your research skills and academics at school, is being able to explain the research you've done to your peers that are not familiar with it. That is a very, very key skill within publicity, is being able to explain something to people that don't know what you're talking about. And by the time they walk out of the room, they know what you're talking about and are excited by it. So I would recommend finding classes and research opportunities that give you the chance to present your findings to groups that are not already familiar with it. Being able to educate others is a really important part of publicity.
All right, thank you so much.
Great responses, Nikki. Miriam, are you in the library, a classroom? I know you have a question coming up.
Yes, I'm in the library, but not on a quiet floor. Nikki, thank you so much. It's been really like impactful hearing you speak. I know like both of your experiences have been in pretty big corporations. Do you think that like that was really helpful for helping you achieve success, or do you think it would have been possible at like a smaller corporation or a startup?
Definitely possible smaller corporation or startup. I don't talk about it as much, but I did work for Davies at one point, my senior year. I walked up to, my boss at the time was a speaker at the UCSB. There was a UCSB comm event, and I walked up and I was like, hi, I'm actually really interested in your career. Are you hiring for interns? And he was like, actually, yeah, email me. And I did. And he works for Davies, which is a organizing firm. I don't quite remember what they go by these days. But what was great about working for startups was that I had a lot more hands-on experience and I had a much larger portfolio after the fact. The downside of being at a corporation, it's closer to being in school. They have a larger internship program, like, all right, you have to do these, and these. You have to talk to these people and you need to help with these things, versus at the startup at Davies, it was much smaller. I was working on letter writing campaigns. I was working on scripts for phone campaigns. Because it was smaller, I gained a lot more experience. And then in turn, when I did apply to those larger corporations, I had something meaningful I could point to that I had done in a work environment, which helped me stand out, even though it wasn't like a huge firm. Also, I will say you guys have some solid smaller internships up in Santa Barbara. They aren't necessarily as flashy as like the Warner Brothers or a Disney or something if you're going to entertainment, and I know that's frustrating. However, the flip side is take advantage of those during the school year. So like I don't know what grade you are, but if you're a junior or senior, try to find that and do the smaller internships in Santa Barbara, your fall, winter, spring quarter, and then you can use those internships to leverage into getting into a bigger company because you've already proven like you're worth hiring and you're worth investing in because you've done these smaller internships, or not smaller internships, you've done these internships at smaller companies.
Thank you.
Good
No
question.
problem.
Angela, do you have a question as well?
Yeah, hi, I'm Angela. Nikki, thank you so much for talking to us today. I know you've talked a little bit about your troubles throughout your career, but I'm wondering at this point in your career, what's the most difficult or challenging aspect of your job?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think for me personally is actually talking about myself. It's part of why I like working on the alumni councils. It forces me to be perceived. It's a running joke in my department that if you let me, you would just never know I existed until you needed me. I hate being perceived, like particularly as a publicist, like I avoid being in front of the camera. You can probably tell by the photos I included. And so something that's really hard as you kind of grow your career is being able to talk about yourself and your successes, your failures, and what you kind of do. Unfortunately, like being a woman of color, there is this perception. I will walk into a room and I'll say that's like, oh, are you a new intern? I'm like, no, I'm leading your publicity campaign. What the fuck? And it's really awkward. And like those moments of confidence can really shake me. So being able to be confident in my own skin and being able to speak not only like I know how to do this and being confident in what I do is really hard for me now. But I can manage a budget, I can do Excel, I can make content, I can do all of these skills, but the ability to verbalize those tasks is what's challenging. And that's why I was talking about earlier. Start that now so that when you do have to do it later on in your career, when you're say pushing for that promotion, it's much more natural. And it's not as simple as bragging about yourself or doing like a humble brag on LinkedIn. It's about being able to speak to, hey, I did this on this thing and it was really beneficial because of XYZ. And that's why I think we should do it on this thing for XYZ. Being able to speak like that is a skill that did not come naturally to me and was really hard. And it's something I still struggle with today. So I try to put myself in environments where I'm forced to practice it in a safe way.
Really
Thank
good
you.
question. Anybody else off camera? You don't need to come on camera if you don't want to. Any other questions for Nikki?
I think Teresa had a question in the chat. What she said was, how did I get involved with Warner Brothers Entertainment and what resources did I use in high school to get internships? So fun fact for me, I had a really pushy econ teacher who thought that I would be wasted if I went into legal career. She's like, you're far too interesting for that. And so she pushed me to attend my high school career center to hear about different jobs and different fields. I grew up in the city of Burbank, which has multiple studios in it. And so a lot of the times the studios would visit our high school to talk about different career opportunities that you could take if you worked at a studio. One of them was publicity and entertainment law, and that kind of caught my eye. And so from there, I was in my career center talking to them. I was talking to my teacher at the time, who was like, yeah, you could do these things. And so they pushed me to the career center, and I think that's still applicable here. And then from there, I applied to every scholarship under the sun. I'm not kidding. I did not have a ton of money. And so one of those internships I applied to was called the Warner Brothers Reach program. Not a lot of people applied to it. It wasn't very well known because it was limited to a specific county that I happened to live in. And from there, I was able to get a scholarship, and that gave me an internship. That got my foot in the door for one internship. And then I was a little too type A. I had a networking grid, and I made a point to have a networking lunch with at least one person a week to expand my network. And then because I was networking so hard as my first internship, that got me into my second one, and so on and so forth. So it was all about leveraging the access I was given to maintain my next access.
Social handles here for the department. And thank you all. This has been amazing. Nikki, you did such a fantastic job. I'm sure everybody on here got a ton out of it. And we will all look forward to reconnecting and having a good rest of the year in 2024.